Now that I've played Diablo Immortal for a while and reached level 60 on my Necromancer, it's time for me to summarize for beginners and casual players what builds I've discovered and played through the game so far, and which ones I liked the most. For each build I will tell you what makes it tick, how to put it together, and the pros and cons of a particular playstyle that build offers. These builds are all for non-competitive PvE, not for PvP. And I never pretend to be an expert in the games that I'm covering, but my reviews and guides are made with real beginners and casual players in mind, not the veterans and min-maxers of the end game. If this sounds like your cup of tea, give the video a like and subscribe for more. Builds in Diablo Immortal are based on three things mostly. First, skills that you've picked out and assigned to an available action slot. Second, what unique gear you have collected, legendaries, that usually change somehow how the skills work. And number three is the what gems, and specifically legendary gems, have you collected or crafted and socketed into those gear pieces, as those give you extra power. That's about it. No massive skill tree to worry about, and while there are many stats that min-maxers would lose their sleep over, you just need to periodically check your combat rating. If gear you've collected results in your higher combat rating, you're doing well. If not, you need to rethink what you're doing. It's kinda simple. With these basics out of the way, let's look at build number 1 that you will likely encounter and start with as a Necromancer. So build number 1 that I loosely named Armored Commander. Basic in its nature, it relies simply on the best legendary gems that you can find, without crafting anything particular, but trying to get and prioritize socketing of Seled's weakening. It's a gem that increases your damage after killing elites. It's a useful gem, available early on, at least it was available to me, I can recommend it. Second gem that I suggest that you look out for is called Fervent Fang. It makes enemies take extra damage, increased damage from you as you start dealing damage to them, so that helps you as well. Gearing wise, this is where it gets interesting. This build relies on Flickering Warmth. Chest piece that turns bone armor skill into spikes that orbit you as you run around, dealing damage to enemies. Graven Bulwark pants also recommended because they increase bone armor duration. You want it lasting as long as possible. And very optionally, you could use Ziroko shoulders that boost damage of your skeletal mage by 10%, as we will be relying on those mages to do most of our damage in this early build. Main hand weapon for me was Simulacrator, which is super useful as it leaves an explosive effigy that taunts enemies and damages them while you float away. Even though we are not going to be using this just yet, we're gonna come back to this skill in the next build. But in this one, we're just gonna use this weapon anyway. And for the shield, I have used Baleful Trinity, which gives your main attack, Soulfire, a little cleave effect as it bounces to an extra enemy and damages them. Playstyle of this build is very easy. You prioritize summoning skeletal mages whenever you can. As soon as it's off cooldown, you summon another one. They do a ton of damage and should be working non-stop. Don't give them a rest. As a summoner, any summoner, I would argue, you need command skeletons on your action keys, as they first of all passively raise skeletal champions, and you also can then use the button actively to charge those skeletons at enemies, and that boosts their attack speed quite massively. This is a staple ability of summoner-inclined necromancers in Diablo Immortal and should be always in use. Now, bone armor skill, as you can see this coming, right, it needs to be recast on cooldown, and the orbiting spikes effect will help you cleave through the mobs. So position yourself accordingly so that the spikes are hitting as many enemies as you can, and that's your very, very basic kind of staple ability there. Command Golem, not augmented anyhow in this particular early build. It's your main tank that you will get at level 50. And for main attack, we will keep Soulfire. It will be cleaving to the second target, and it has the best ultimate ability that looks like Summon Raging Spirits from Path of Exile. And yeah, so whenever you can, you use the ultimate ability as well. Pros and cons of this build. It's really where I'd start as a summoner necro. The build is really accessible and super easy to put together. Yes, you still need some legendaries here and there, but in essence it's a very simple build that I don't recommend that you would stick with for too long, but that you might start with and then evolve it into something different as you get other further gear, better gear, and we will talk about other builds in a minute. The main con is that there is no particular massive power coming from this build, especially as you approach level 60. It is reduced mobility because we are not using our movement skill in this build and we are sacrificing it for Bone Barrier instead, so it's not very exciting. Now, speaking of excitement, let's move on to build number 2, which is loosely named Evasive Curser. Yeah, I'm very creative with names like that. As we spent quite a bit of time talking about baseline build number 1, I will only focus on what changed in this one and subsequent builds as you get more gear and maybe would like to diversify a little bit. So this summoner version makes use of the Dark Curse skill as soon as we can power it up and augment it by Mournful Destroyer Pants that turn this curse from debilitating one into a damaging one. We removed Golem from this build in favor of the Dark Curse AoE damage spell, and we also gave up Bone Barrier for increased mobility, because we are going to be now finally using Wraith form. That, like I said earlier, is amazing for the use with the Simulacrator main hand weapon, as it taunts enemies as soon as you disappear and damages them exploding while you can escape. It's really good. Playstyle is obviously a little less tanky, which might be seen as a con, but it does more AoE damage with the curse as long as you don't mind waiting for it to tick to do its damage, rather than as it happens instantly on some other skills such as Curse Explosion, for example, Corpse Explosion. I also prefer to taunt enemies and escape with Wraith form rather than rely on Bone Barrier to just stand there and bang and absorb hits, if I'm honest. This build is quite enjoyable, but it does feel like I miss the Golem, because Golem is also a Necro staple minion, so I do miss the Golem, but you know, the build has its pluses. Build number 3, Summoner playstyle version number 3, is my Explosive Curser, which was admittedly a bit of a mad scientist experiment, but I decided to keep it here for your list because it actually can be quite fun and can be described as high risk, high reward build. I don't suggest or recommend that you try this build in solo play, but it can be very fun and offer massive AoE damage relatively early in the game if you are playing as part of a group that does dungeons or Elder Rifts. Key added element to this build is Corpse Explosion, which is augmented by Final Embrace effect that comes from Surge and Stillness Shoulders. This is one of my favorite abilities in the game, so far anyway, as Final Embrace turns corpses into creepy spiders that charge at enemies and explode on impact. So what we do here is we replace our Skeletal Mage with Corpse Explosion, keeping the rest of the build unchanged from build number 2. This way, we simply run behind the group or charge ahead if we get too excited and use both AoE skills, Dark Curse and Corpse Explosion, to do a lot more, like double amount of AoE damage. Biggest problem of this build is that while it can be fun, it feels kinda incomplete and it's not as smooth enough to play consistently, at least not in my experience. Like, as you cause Corpse Explode continuously and curse everything, you barely get a chance to use Soulfire and its awesome ultimate. And your skeleton champions and charging of them to the target also becomes an afterthought, at least in my observations. In any case, give it a go if you got the right legendaries, obviously, because you need to augment them, these abilities, before you use them, and if you just feel like something different. Build number 4, and this is where things get a little more serious and I suppose sustainable for endgame, is my Molten Commander, where we rely on Desolatoria Dagger, if you get one, that turns our golem into a molten lava one. It does burning damage to all enemies around it. That's an awesome AoE. We forget the Dark Curse, bring back the golem to burn enemies, keep our Corpse Explosion because it's awesome, and reintroduce Skeletal Mage into the mix because we are back to mainstream summoner path now. Plus, if you have Ziroko Shoulders, they give those skeletal mages a little boost of damage of 10%. If you really want to do that, you can do that. This build loses mobility and evasiveness, and you don't have also the bone barrier, because you're not using wraith form anymore, you're not using bone barrier anymore, but you have the tanking golem, you have an awesome mage, you have a charging skeletal champions, and corpse explosion for massive AoE. Again, a little bit of pros, a little bit of cons. Which brings us to final build number 5. It's my explosive captain. Yeah, I know. This is the build I probably would stick with for a while now, until something better comes along, as it appears to be most balanced for my personally preferred summoner playstyle. Let me know in the comments down below, and like the video while you're at it if you prefer this build too. Main addition to our wardrobe here is the Crown of Gilded Leash, legendary piece that turns your command skeleton skill into raising a single powerful skeletal captain that will charge and whirlwind like around the enemies, doing massive AoE, plus looking arguably quite awesome. I got this legendary piece as the 7th day login reward, if I'm not mistaken, so you could get it too, I assume, if you're playing a Necro. It might be connected to my slightly upgraded Battle Pass, the best $5 I've ever spent, or maybe it's not. I didn't notice exactly, my apologies, so please double check for yourselves. Skills have not changed since build number 4, so we're sticking with the same Summoner's Army and Corpse Explosion. But now, in addition to our Lava Golem AoE, we have Skeletal Captain with his Whirlwind, and and that's basically it. So to top this up, I do recommend crafting Follower's Burden, legendary gem, as soon as you have materials for it. It increases damage of your summons and decreases the damage they take, which quite obviously is great for minion-based necromancers. But again, the numbers that they boost damage by are not mind-boggling, only like 6% or something. Like that's unless you're a min-maxer, that's probably not that much of a difference, to be honest with you. And that's it for today, my fellow Necro Summoners. I hope this little list helped you out a little bit, gave you some ideas, or at least something to look forward to while you try to get the right legendaries, if this playstyle excites you, obviously. Please enjoy the game, leave a comment and a like, and subscribe for more similar videos, as I'll be putting out similar videos for all the other classes that I'm yet to try in Diablo Immortal. See you later, thanks for watching, talk to you next time.
I must wait.